Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Check it out at carsandbids.com. This is the Maserati Grecale Trofeo, and it brings some exotic to the small luxury SUV world. The Porsche Macan, the BMW X3M, the Audi SQ5, they're all fine, but they don't have the cachet of the Maserati brand name. Today, I'm going to review the Grecale Trofeo and show you all of its quirks and features, and see how Maserati does a small SUV. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Maserati Grecale Trofeo. So, a little overview. Like I said, Maserati's small SUV, smaller than their midsize Levante, and the Grecale is intended to compete with the BMW X3, the Porsche Macan, maybe the Alfa Romeo Stelvio, sort of the sportier, small luxury SUVs. Now, there's three versions of this. The two base models are called the GT and then the Modena. The GT starts around 70 grand, the Modena is like 76, and they both use a turbo 4-cylinder with 300 or 325 horsepower. But this is the Trofeo, the high-performance version of the Grecale with a turbo V6 that's borrowed from the Maserati MC20 sports car. Now, it's detuned a little bit in the Grecale, but it still has 525 horsepower, and it's good for 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds. Those are serious numbers for any SUV, but especially a compact luxury SUV. Now, the Grecale Trofeo is specifically a direct competitor to the BMW X3M competition, the Porsche Macan GTS and Turbo, and the Alfa Stelvio Quadrifoglio, the most high-performance little SUVs. Although it's worth pointing out the Grecale is a couple inches longer than all of those. It's almost small, bordering on midsize in terms of overall length. But while the Grecale Trofeo is a competitor to these SUVs, it has a significantly higher price tag. This has a starting price of $111,000, which is huge money for a compact luxury SUV, no matter how performancy. For comparison, the X3M competition has around 500 horsepower and a starting price in the low $80,000 range. The Alfa Stelvio Quadrifoglio also has about 500 horsepower, and it starts around $85,000. And the Porsche Macan, the GTS, is the top model in the lineup right now. They have it returned with a new turbo. That has 435 horsepower and an $87,000 base price. Again, this has 525 and starts at 111 grand. It's a lot more expensive, but also more powerful. It's kind of exactly what you'd expect from the exotic in this segment. And next we move on to the quirks and features of the Grecale. There are more than I expected. We'll start with the key, which is this. It's actually pretty nice. Weighty, leather wrapped with aluminum on the sides, and it doesn't have like cheap plastic buttons. Instead, there's just a leather pad, and you kind of press the general area of what you're trying to do. It's a nice key, and there's also a wearable key that's offered with this car. I guess you can put it around your wrist if you're an active lifestyle millennial, and then go for a swim or play sports, and then come back to your car and open the door without having to stick the key somewhere. It's a decent idea. But you got the key, you want to get inside. The door handle is unusual. You stick your hand into this opening. It's fixed in place instead of a door handle you pull out like most cars, and then there's a rubber popper in there. You push it, and the door electronically pops open. A little bit unorthodox. But open up the door, climb inside, and you are greeted by an entirely different interior compared to other Maserati models. I have laughed at Maserati interiors in the past for being low quality, cheap, not really all that nice. This car is very different, much higher quality than before, much better materials. Everything is a lot nicer than you might expect if you've spent time in a Ghibli or a Quattroporte from the last 5 or 6 years. This is a real upmarket interior to match this car's real upmarket price tag. Just as an example, the seats have this nice chevron design with attractive stitching. There's good materials basically everywhere you look. I love the design of the climate vents, which have this like silver line running across the whole interior. You barely even know they're climate vents until you go to adjust them with the little climate vent switches. You also have nice carbon fiber trim in the center, and it feels like exposed carbon fiber instead of some glossy thing that'll get fingerprinty and not feel as nice. Again, great materials in here, really a bit of a surprise given recent Maseratis. But anyway, on to more unusual quirks in here, starting with the clock, which is an analog clock, but it's on a screen. This central circular screen mounted on the dashboard contains an analog clock. The reason it's a screen is because they also use that clock screen for the voice control system. So when you tell the car to do something and it talks to you to confirm, that screen sort of lights up to let you know it understood what you're saying, and then it goes back to being a clock again. Next up, you go to start the engine, and you'll notice the button is not where you'd expect on the right side of the steering column like in most cars. It's also not on the left side like in Porsches. Instead, it's mounted on the steering wheel itself. To the bottom left of the center, this button here starts the engine. That is a bit of an unorthodox engine starter button placement, but even more unusual is the gear selector. You got nothing in the center to shift into drive or park. Instead, it's buttons mounted here between the two center screens. You got an upper screen, a lower screen, and in between, park, reverse, neutral, and drive. Certainly a little bit odd, not what you're expecting. Man, speaking of some strange placements, let's go back to that dual screen for a second. Like I said, upper screen, which contains most things you generally use, navigation system, phone, music, all that's in the upper screen. The lower is primarily used for your climate controls, but not entirely. In fact, the lower screen also contains the controls for your headlights. They're not to the left of the steering wheel like in almost every other car. They're on the lower screen. I have never seen a car that shares its climate control area with its headlight control area. That is certainly odd. Also unusual in there, you access the seat memory in this screen. Instead of a button on the door panel at the side of the seat memory is right here in this screen, the same one with the climate controls. Now, when you're using this lower screen to adjust the climate controls, take a look. It's a lot. There are a lot of functions in here. It's quite a busy, rather complex screen with a lot of different options. Heated seats, change the fan speed, everything is integrated into this relatively small screen, and it seems, frankly, a bit overwhelming. Even though this is primarily fixed as the climate control screen to save you from going into a menu to adjust the climate controls, it's still going to be hard to do any real adjustments without looking down at this screen and briefly taking your eyes off the road. As for other unusual controls in here, how about getting out, which is not done with a simple door latch because, again, these doors are electronically popped open. So you have a button, this circular button here, you press it, and that opens up the door. Now, just in case your electronic popper fails, you do have a fail-safe mechanical latch below the button. You can see right here, and you can pull on that and open the door and get out if the electronics don't work. And here's another unusual control, the volume adjustment. Of course, the driver has one on the steering wheel, but for the passenger, it's this. On the passenger side of the centered screen area, a slider, and when you slide it, it makes a rather odd confirmation sound. Take a listen. Another interesting feature in this interior, the shift paddles, which are large and they stay fixed in place while you're turning. This is a hallmark of true performance cars, fixed in place shift paddles, so you know exactly where they are even if you're mid-corner and you don't have to go fumbling around for them. Well, it's like that on the Grecale Trofeo as well, cementing its status as a performance car. But just in case you weren't convinced by the shift paddles, how about the drive modes? You can adjust them with this little dial on the right side of the steering wheel in the center, opposite the start-stop button. You have 5 drive modes in this vehicle. None are eco mode and 3 are sport mode. You have a Sport, a GT, and a Corsa, which is like the race mode. Now, if you go into Corsa, the digital gauge cluster completely adjusts to show you only the most important on-track things, like your G-forces and vehicle temperature information, the gear you're in. No worry about your fuel economy or your speed, anything like that. It's a very different display in Corsa mode. And all of your electronic nannies have turned off. Your stability controls and your blind spot monitor, it's all gone when you're in Corsa. You don't need that stuff on the racetrack. And by the way, one other benefit of Corsa mode is that it really opens up the exhaust to sound performance-y. Take a listen to a couple of revs in Corsa. But anyway, back into the interior, moving on to the infotainment screen, the large upper center screen here. There's some good and bad with this screen. It's decent size, not huge, but big enough, and it's intuitive. It's easy to figure out exactly where you need to go to do stuff. Although, one drawback, there is some lag between screens, as you can see. You tap, and sometimes you're waiting a little bit for the next screen to load. A little more than you'd expect for a modern car. Usually expect smartphone speed. Now, one thing I really like about this infotainment screen is the home screen, which shows two large displays. They call them widgets that basically give you two pieces of big information at once. You have the navigation, the music, or you can configure them to show whatever it is that you want to see. That's a great home screen, and that's basically how all the automakers should do it. Now, I also like if you go into the vehicle tab and go into performance, you can see all sorts of different performance metrics and displays, including drag race times and acceleration times. You can set your own, and various additional gauges you might want to keep an eye on if you're on the racetrack with your Grecale. And there's even some off-road displays here. You can see your pitch and your roll, just in case you want to take this off the pavement. Some cool added displays in the performance tab. And next up we move on to the back seat of the Grecale, which is actually surprisingly large. Sitting back here, I have decent room for legs and knees and head. It's not huge, but it's bigger than what you'd get in other small luxury SUVs like the Porsche Macan. Now, I mentioned earlier the Grecale is a couple of inches longer than the Macan and the X3 and other rivals, and I think this is where you see that in practice, a little more rear seat space, so this is a little bit more family SUV-able. And there's some other nice stuff back here. You have climate controls in back, which isn't commonly seen in the compact luxury SUV world. More common in mid-size luxury SUVs, but you got it here, along with rear heated seats and rear climate vents to increase your comfort. You also have little charge ports down here, although strangely one USB-A and one USB-C. That A is going to feel pretty outdated pretty soon. In fact, it kind of already does, but that's what they've done. Aside from that, the other interesting things back here, you got good quality, just like you do up front. High quality seats with those chevrons and the nice stitching. Everything feels and looks good in the back of this car. No cheaping out in back and making everything nice up front. You also have those electronic door poppers in back, just like in front. You push the button and the door opens up. Although one interesting thing, there's no auxiliary mechanical door opener back here. So if you need to climb out of a Grecale and the battery is dead, well, you gotta climb into the front seat first, and only then can you get out. And next up we move on to the cargo area of the Grecale. The tailgate pops open electronically like everything else in this world and reveals what I think is actually a rather small cargo area. It looks like the sides are a little bit bulkier, and so there's just not as much space to put stuff on the sides, although it is a little deeper than the cargo area in some rivals, so maybe it all evens out. But nothing huge here, and there's no real underfloor storage. You lift up the floor and you can see there's some components down there, a little bit of storage far up against the back seat, but not really a lot of extra space down there. Not a huge cargo area. Although one nice benefit, this little tab on the side lets you drop the rear seats from the cargo area, which is a nice convenience that you don't always see on the compact SUVs, even luxury ones, so it's nice to see it here. Now, one other item you'll notice you don't get in the Grecale Trofeo is a spare tire. You go under the floor here, you can see a tire inflator kit, but no spare, which probably makes sense given that this has 21-inch wheels, quite large for a compact SUV. And of course, those wheels are unique to the Trofeo to emphasize its sportiness. There are other Trofeo upgrades as well over the standard Grecale. One is this fender badge that just outwardly says Trofeo to make it clear exactly what this is. You also have some nice carbon fiber touches on the outside. The front splitter is carbon fiber, as you can see, gives it a performance-y look. Same deal with the rocker panels down the side of the car, carbon fiber, and the rear diffuser, which is probably the most obvious spot of carbon fiber that distinguishes the Trofeo from the standard Grecale. As for a more subtle upgrade for the Trofeo over the standard car, this Maserati badge on the side has two little red lines in it instead of just all being silver. Those two little red lines signify the high-performance Trofeo. But just in case you're wondering exactly where they came up with the name Grecale, proudly printed on the back. Now, apparently, it's the name of a certain type of wind, which means the Grecale joins several other tremendously exciting cars that were named after winds. The Maserati Bora, the Maserati Khamsin, the Maserati Shamal, and the Volkswagen Passat. All right, driving the Grecale Trofeo. I gotta say, I haven't been incredibly impressed with a lot of the latest Maserati models, but they seem to be taking their whole situation a little bit more seriously now, which is to say they get that they have this desirable brand name, and instead of just sending out lease deals and trying to get as many people as they can, it seems like they're saying, well, let's actually make some nice cars. Let's maybe compete with Porsche in terms of quality and performance, because our brand name is almost that strong. And I think there's something a little bit more to that. So they've priced this car at Porsche levels or above, but they're delivering Porsche performance. And when you sit around and look at this interior, it feels pretty damn nice. So how does this drive? Well, I haven't driven the base model, I haven't driven the Modena, and I think the experience of those cars is going to be dramatically different. With a 4-cylinder engine with something like 80% less power, I mean, they're going to be totally different cars. But from the perspective of the Trofeo, I'm impressed and interested to see kind of how it does. Let me talk about how I'm impressed. It sounds great. When you accelerate hard, it really sounds great. It's not a big throaty V8, but it has a nice rumble to it, a nice roar, and when you really get on it, it really gets loud, which isn't true of some 6-cylinder engines, you know, in this post-V8 world. The other thing that it does great, and I mean just great, is steering and handling. You know, everybody who wants to spend 100 grand on a luxury performance SUV, they want the bigger ones, the Cayennes and the X5Ms and all that. But the thing that I've always found funny about that is the more desirable ones would be the smaller ones because they drive so well. The GLC 63s and the X3Ms. But a lot of people who buy those, they have this inferiority complex about them. Oh, I only have the little one. Well, that's the one you want if performance is actually what you want. And this car is the epitome of that theory because it steers and handles and drives so dramatically better than almost any other SUV I've ever driven. The steering is tremendously tight. All you got to do is lightly twist on the wheel and you get an amazing feedback and it sends you precisely in the direction that you want to go. The handling is fantastic. It's just not all that big. And so it's able to kind of go around corners hard and you do what you want and the car handles it. It feels very, very precise. It rewards precise motions in a way that very few vehicles do. This is on the driving experience level of Porsche Macan GTS and Turbo and Alfa Stelvio Quadrifoglio, which is one of my very favorite driving performance SUVs. The other part of my thoughts, I'm curious exactly how it does as a result. Like, Maserati has put so much effort into making this thing great in terms of driving, in terms of its interior, that they've almost raised the price to a level that is kind of difficult to justify. I would be surprised if this does well, especially the Trofeo version. If it does well, when you look at the fact that Cayennes are available, Cayenne S, it doesn't have the same level of performance, but it's like the next step up. And that's almost what people prefer in this segment. They don't care about all-out performance, even though car enthusiasts wish they did. What they really care about is how they look, how it is perceived, and that's a lot of the buyers of these cars. And I have a suspicion that they've made this almost too good, and that jacked up the price almost too much, and now it's not really going to find realistic buyers of a vehicle like this. But the good news is what it offers. I mean, if you really want a performance SUV, and a great one, this is a great performance SUV. It's not the best brand name, but it certainly has more cachet than Alfa or BMW or Audi. And if you just want an all-out performer that's going to be a blast to drive, this is that. You just have to spend a lot of money to get it. It sounds so good, it's so quick, it moves so well. It's just a great performing SUV. The price point is obviously the big drawback, and we'll see if people are ready to spend 111 grand on a Maserati, which is not the strongest brand right now, that's the size of an X3. I think it's going to be a tough fight, specifically to sell these Trofeo models. And so that's the new Maserati Grecale Trofeo, Maserati's take on the small SUV. This is surprisingly impressive, with a pretty good interior, excellent performance, and an exotic car brand name and cachet. It's also a lot of money for a small SUV. Most people with this kind of budget probably step up to a larger vehicle like the Porsche Cayenne or Maserati's own Levante. But if you want a lot of performance in a small SUV package, this is the one. And now it's time to give the Grecale Trofeo a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 66 out of 100, which places the Grecale Trofeo here against similar cars. It ties the BMW X3M competition and the Alfa Stelvio Quadrifoglio, but the Grecale Trofeo's real issue is price, and assigning a score in the value category here is hard. I say that because the Grecale is a great value if you prioritize performance above all else, as it delivers better than basically any other vehicle like this. But if your thing is a balanced vehicle that does it all, the Grecale Trofeo seems expensive in the face of the Alfa Stelvio and the Porsche Cayenne. In short, the Grecale Trofeo is great, but it's an extreme performer with the extreme price tag to match.